I want to tell you about the moment I understood that someone I had trusted with something I had spent years earning was standing in front of me expecting me to thank him for it. Not a dramatic moment, not the kind that arrives with raised voices or broken things. The quiet kind, the kind that is somehow worse because of its quietness, because the absence of drama forces you to absorb the full weight of what has happened without the temporary relief that noise sometimes provides. I was standing beside my car in the late afternoon light on Rua das Acacias, holding a document I had found on the passenger seat, and Otavio was standing a few feet away with his hands in his pockets and the particular expression of a man who has decided that the best strategy in a difficult situation is to project casualness until the other person accepts the reality being presented to them. He said, "Marina, it is what it is. These things happen." I looked at the document in my hands. Then I looked at him. I said nothing for a moment, because there are things you need to sit with briefly before you speak about them. Not because you do not know what you want to say, but because you understand that the moment you are in deserves more than the first words that come. The document was a service record from a repair shop in a part of the city I had never taken my car to. The date on it was from the previous week. The work described was not minor, and beneath the description of the work, in the clear, unambiguous language of official documents, was a total that had not been paid. A total that was, according to the shop's records, associated with my name, my car, my name, a debt I had never agreed to carry, and Otavio, standing in my driveway with his hands in his pockets, telling me that these things happen. My name is Marina Valença. I am 76 years old. I live alone at Rua das Acacias, 418, in Joinville, Santa Catarina, in a house I have maintained for 22 years with the attention of someone who understands that the things you care for carefully are the things that last. I spent most of my working life as a seamstress, not in a large operation, not in a factory, but in the particular way of a woman who has built a practice from skill and reputation, and the accumulated trust of clients who return because the work is done correctly, with the right materials, and delivered when it was promised. I retired 8 years ago. The blue sedan parked in front of my house on Rua das Acacias is a 2016 model that I purchased with my own savings 4 years ago. A decision I made after nearly a year of deliberate consideration, of comparing options, of calculating what I could manage comfortably without compromising the other elements of my financial life. I did not buy the most impressive car available to me. I bought the right one, the one that suited my needs, that I could maintain properly, that would serve me reliably for the years I intended to keep it. I keep it clean myself. This is not a small detail. It is, I think, one of the things that tells you the most about my relationship with this particular object. I wash it on Saturday mornings, in the early hours before the street becomes busy, with the methodical attention of someone who regards the task as more than practical. I check the tire pressure monthly. I have the oil changed at the interval recommended by the manufacturer, not the extended interval that some shops suggest when they believe you are not paying close attention. I have a small notebook in the house where I record each service visit, the date, the mileage, the work performed, the cost. The receipts are filed in a folder in the third drawer of my study desk, in chronological order. I know where every document connected to that car is, which is how I knew, the moment I saw the service record from the shop I had never visited, that something was wrong. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we arrived at the moment in the driveway. Otavio Nogueira is 43 years old and has been married to my daughter Fernanda for 14 years. He is a capable man in many of the ways that matter for daily living. Practical, resourceful, good at the surface presentation of competence. He works in logistics coordination for a company in the industrial district, and he carries himself with the ease of someone who has spent years managing things and expects as a result to be trusted with other things. His relationship with me has always been civil in the way that certain relationships between adults who did not choose each other but share someone they both love are civil. Not unfriendly, not close, maintained at a temperature that suits everyone and requires no particular effort to sustain. He arrived at my door on a Thursday afternoon 3 weeks before the driveway moment. I remember the afternoon specifically because I had been in the middle of something. Not anything important. Simply the particular engagement of a woman organizing her own time, the small satisfactions of an afternoon arranged to suit herself. I was pressing a blouse I had worn the previous week, a task I find genuinely meditative in the way that work, which requires precision and produces a visible result, always has been meditative to me. The sound of the doorbell interrupted the particular quality of that afternoon, and I set down the iron and went to the door. Ottavio was there with the ease of someone who expects to be welcome and has not questioned that expectation. He came in and sat at the kitchen table and accepted the coffee I offered, not because the acceptance of coffee was anything other than automatic between us, but because that is how conversations begin in my house and always have been. He talked about a few ordinary things first. Fernanda's work situation, which had been busy lately, a minor maintenance issue at their house that he was dealing with, the weather, which had been unusual for the season. Then he asked about the car. He said he needed to transport some equipment for a project. He was vague about the nature of the project in the way that people are vague about things they have decided they do not need to explain fully. He said his own vehicle was unavailable that week. He said it would only be for 2 or 3 days. He said he would be careful with it, would fill the tank before returning it, would treat it exactly as he would treat his own. I hesitated. I want to be honest about that hesitation because I think it matters. Because the honest account of what happened requires me to acknowledge that something in me registered a small uncertainty before I agreed. Not alarm. Not the sharp signal of a clear instinct that says, "Do not do this." A quieter thing. The faint awareness of a woman who has spent 76 years learning to read situations, registering that the request was slightly more vague than a request of this kind needed to be. I did not follow that awareness. I said yes because Ottavio is family, and because I have always believed that helping family is one of the ways people demonstrate that love is not only a feeling, but a practice. I said yes because the hesitation felt like suspicion, and I did not want to be suspicious of my own son-in-law over a car loan. I said yes because I am the kind of woman who has spent most of her life being the person who finds a way to help when help is asked for, and that quality does not simply disappear because a small and quiet part of you has noticed something that doesn't quite fit. I gave him the keys. The keychain is an old one, a small metal charm that Fernanda brought me from a trip she took to Florianopolis years ago, when she was still young enough to bring her mother souvenirs from trips the way young people do. I have replaced every practical element of my keychain over the years. The key itself was recut when I had the locks changed, the ring was replaced when it became too worn to hold properly. But the charm has stayed. It is the kind of small persistence that people maintain, not from sentimentality exactly, but from the accumulated meaning of an object that has been present long enough to feel like part of something rather than simply a thing. I handed Ottavio that keychain with the Florianopolis charm, and he took it with the easy confidence of a man who has received what he came for and is ready to move on to whatever comes next. He said he would have it back by Sunday. Sunday arrived, and the car did not. I received a message, not a call, a message, on Sunday afternoon saying that the project had extended and that he would need it a few more days. He apologized. He said it would be returned by Wednesday, at the latest. I wrote back that Wednesday was fine. I want to tell you about the week without my car because it is not simply a backdrop to what came later. It is part of the story in its own right, part of what built the particular quality of feeling I brought to the driveway moment. I am not a woman who is helpless without a car. I have managed without one before, in earlier periods of my life when transportation was something to be arranged rather than assumed. But the difference between choosing not to use something and not having access to it is significant, and the week had a quality of constraint that I found increasingly difficult to simply absorb. There was an appointment on Tuesday that I rescheduled because taking 2 buses would have required leaving 2 hours earlier than the appointment's time, and I was not prepared to do that for something that could be rescheduled. There was a purchase I needed to make on Wednesday. Nothing dramatic, a specific type of thread that a sewing supply shop across the city carries and that I had been planning to pick up, that I also deferred. Small things. The kind that individually seem manageable and which collectively produce a particular quality of disruption that is harder to describe than it should be. Wednesday came. Ottavio did not bring the car. The message this time came in the morning, which told me he had known before the day began that he would not be keeping the Wednesday commitment and had decided to inform me in the morning rather than waiting until the afternoon, which I registered as a minor form of consideration that was still insufficient. He said something had come up. He said Thursday, absolutely Thursday. Thursday afternoon, the car appeared in front of my house. I was at the window when it arrived, which was not coincidence. I had been aware of the time in the way you become aware of time when you are waiting for something. I saw Ottavio park it at the curb. I saw him sit in it for a moment before getting out, which I noticed without knowing yet why I was noticing it. Then he came to the door and gave me the keys and said everything had gone well and that he was grateful and that he hoped the extra days had not been too much of an inconvenience. I said it was fine. It was not entirely fine, but I said it was fine because the car was back and the situation was over, and I have spent enough years understanding that not every feeling requires immediate expression to know when to let something pass. He left. I went to the car. The tank was full, as he had promised. I checked, and the gauge confirmed it. And this small, fulfilled promise had the momentary effect of making me feel that my hesitation had been ungenerous. The exterior was clean, or clean enough. I walked around it with the habitual attention I give to my own things after they have been in other people's care. Not suspicion exactly, but the responsible examination of someone who knows her property and takes that knowledge seriously. The car was on its exterior, more or less as I had left it. I got in. I do this whenever I return to the car after it has been away from me for any period. I sit in the driver's seat and I look at the interior in the particular way of someone reacquainting herself with a familiar space. The dash. The small storage area where I keep a packet of tissues and a folded road map that I have carried since before navigation apps existed, and which I have kept because I find physical maps clarifying in a way that digital ones have never fully replicated. The back seat. The pocket on the passenger side door where I keep a small notebook and the pen I use for recording mileage. It was when I looked at the passenger seat that I saw it. A folded document on the seat, slightly wedged between the seat cushion and the center console, as though it had been placed there or had fallen there, or had been left behind by someone who had occupied that seat during the days I did not have my car. I took it. I unfolded it, and I read it. A service record. From a repair shop on the north side of the city, near the industrial district, a part of Joinville I know by name but have no personal reason to frequent. The date was from 8 days prior. The vehicle details at the top of the document matched my car exactly: the model, the year, the license plate number. My name appeared in the client field. The work described was not minor maintenance. It was the kind of repair that results from a specific kind of damage, the kind that does not happen to a car that has been used carefully for ordinary purposes. The total was significant. And beside the total was a marking I had seen before on service documents and which I understood perfectly. A notation indicating that the amount had not been paid at the time of service and was being carried as an outstanding balance. A balance in my name. For work done on my car, during the days when my car was with Ottavio. I sat in the driver's seat with the document in my hands and the late afternoon light coming through the windshield at the particular angle it reaches in the late hours, and I let what I was holding arrange itself into its correct meaning. Then I called Ottavio. He answered, quickly. Quickly enough that I noticed it, The quality of someone who is in the habit of answering quickly from certain numbers, because quick answers are part of the image of a responsible person that he maintains with some care. I said, "Ottavio, I found a document in the car, a service record from a shop on the north side. Can you tell me what this is?" There was a pause. Not a long one, but present. He said, "Oh, yeah. There was a small issue with the car during the week. I handled it," I said. "The record says the balance wasn't paid." Another pause. He said, "That's actually something we can sort out. It's a bit complicated, but basically," I said, "Come to the house, please. I would like to discuss this in person." He came. He arrived 40 minutes later and walked up to where I was standing beside the car. I had not gone back inside. I had waited there, which I think told him something about the quality of my attention before we had exchanged a word in person. He had changed his shirt since the earlier visit, which was a small detail I noticed and filed. He stood a few feet from me. He explained, in the calm and slightly deflective way of a man who has prepared an explanation during a 40-minute drive, that the car had experienced a problem during the week. He said it was not his fault. The problem was mechanical, pre-existing, the sort of thing that happens with older vehicles. He said the shop had done the work and that it was taken care of. He said the outstanding balance was something that the shop had agreed to carry temporarily and that it would need to be settled, but that given the circumstances, he used the word circumstances with the vagueness of someone who hopes that vagueness will be sufficient. It seemed fair that the cost should be associated with the vehicle's regular maintenance. With my regular maintenance, my cost. I looked at him. He said, "Marina, it is what it is. These things happen." And there it was. The moment I began with. The moment I have been working back toward through everything I have told you. The moment that required all of this context in order to carry its full weight. I did not respond immediately. I looked at the document in my hands, and then I looked at Ottavio, and I felt, not anger, not yet the clean and clarifying thing that anger becomes when it has been properly processed, something colder and more patient than anger. The particular feeling of a woman who has spent 76 years being careful, being thorough, keeping her receipts in a folder in chronological order, and her service records in a notebook and her keychain charm from Florianopolis after all these years, who is standing in her own driveway being told that a debt she never agreed to is now her problem because these things happen. I said, "I'll need some time to look at this properly." He nodded. He seemed, if I am reading this correctly, and I believe I am because I have been reading people for 76 years, slightly relieved, as though my request for time indicated that I was considering acceptance. As though the careful woman he had borrowed the car from might, with sufficient time, arrive at the conclusion that absorbing this consequence was the right thing to do. He did not know what I was actually planning to do with the time. He did not know about the notebook in my study where every service record is written in my own hand. He did not know that the document he had left on the passenger seat, carelessly, the way people leave things in places when they are not in the habit of thinking carefully about what gets left behind, had a date on it. A date that did not match the narrative he had just presented. I went inside. I went to the third drawer of my study desk. I opened the folder, and I began to read. There is a particular satisfaction in being organized that most people underestimate until the moment organization becomes the thing that saves them. Not the aesthetic satisfaction of a tidy desk or a well-arranged shelf. Something more functional than that, more purposeful. The satisfaction of having treated information as worth keeping, of having understood throughout years of ordinary life that the documents and records and receipts that accumulate around us are not bureaucratic nuisance, but a form of memory that does not distort with time the way human memory does. They record what happened. They record when. They do not soften inconvenient details or rearrange sequences to make the story more comfortable. They simply hold what they hold exactly as it was for as long as you keep them. I have kept things carefully my entire life. This quality was formed early, in the years when I was building my seamstress practice, when every bolt of fabric ordered and every payment received and every delivery promised needed to be tracked because my livelihood depended on the accuracy of the tracking. I could not afford to misremember what I had charged a client or what I owed a supplier. The discipline of record-keeping was not something I chose the way you choose a preference. It was something I developed the way you develop any skill that your survival requires, through necessity, through repetition, through the accumulated understanding that precision is not a personality trait but a practice. The folder in the third drawer of my study desk contained 11 years of service records for the blue sedan. 11 years because I had kept the records from my previous vehicle as well, and when I purchased the new one, I had transferred my practice without interruption. The records for the current car began 4 years ago, when I drove it off the lot and immediately noted the mileage, the date, and the condition of the vehicle in the first entry of the new notebook. 41 entries since then, each one with a date, a mileage reading, the name and address of the shop, the work performed, the cost, and a brief notation of anything the mechanic had mentioned that I needed to monitor. I sat at my study desk, and I went through those entries with the same attention I had given to the service record from the North Side shop, methodically, in sequence, allowing each entry to establish the baseline against which the anomalous document could be measured. The most recent entry in my notebook, before Ottavio borrowed the car, was from 6 weeks prior, an oil change and a tire rotation at the shop on the south side of the city where I have been taking the car since I bought it, with a mechanic named Celso who has been doing this work for 30 years and who speaks about vehicles with the particular unhurried authority of someone who has nothing to prove. The car had been in excellent condition. Celso had noted nothing requiring attention, no developing issues, no advisory items. The notation in my notebook reflected this: all clear, next service in 3 months. I set my notebook beside the service record from the North Side shop. The date on the shop's document was 8 days ago. Ottavio had borrowed the car 10 days ago, which meant the service, whatever it actually was, had been performed 2 days after he took possession of the car. Now I read the description of the work again, more carefully. The document listed what it described as suspension and undercarriage repair, a specific category of work that does not happen without a specific kind of cause. Suspension components do not simply fail on a well-maintained vehicle in good condition. They fail because of impacts, because of roads that were not meant for the vehicle's clearance, because of a use that the vehicle was not designed for or that the driver was not attentive to. They fail, in other words, because of something that happened, something with a cause. I wrote that word in the margin of the paper nearest me, cause. Then I looked at the total again. The amount was not catastrophic in the sense of being financially ruinous. I want to be honest about that, because I think accuracy matters more than drama. But it was significant. It was the kind of amount that requires consideration, that does not simply disappear into a monthly budget without being felt. More importantly, it was an amount I had not agreed to and had not been warned about and had not been consulted on before it was incurred. That, I was increasingly understanding, was the actual problem, not the money alone, the decision that preceded the money. The decision that had been made with my car and in my name without my knowledge, and which was now being presented to me in my own driveway. As a consequence, I was expected to absorb because Ottavio had decided that these things happen. I spent a long time at that desk. I read through the service record several more times, looking at each element with the specific attention that the document warranted. And I found, on the third reading, something I had initially passed over. A small notation in the upper right corner of the document, beneath the shop's logo and above the date field. A reference number of some kind, formatted differently from the account reference below it, that I did not immediately recognize the purpose of. I wrote it down in my notebook. Then I went to make tea, because I have learned over 76 years that the quality of thinking you do when you are physically comfortable is better than the thinking you do when you have been sitting in one position for an extended period without attending to your body's requirements. The tea was a practical decision, not a comfort one, though I will admit that the routine of making it, the water, the pot, the particular rhythm of the preparation, provided a brief interval of ordinary action that was useful as a kind of reset between one part of my thinking and the next. I brought the tea back to the study. I looked at the reference number I had copied. Then I called the shop. Not Ottavio, not Fernanda. The shop. I found the number on the document, and I dialed it, and a man answered. Not Celso, not anyone I knew, a voice I did not recognize, and I introduced myself by my full name and said I was calling regarding a service record associated with my vehicle. I gave him the account reference number. He asked me to hold for a moment. While I was holding, I thought about Fernanda. Fernanda is 44 years old and has been, for all of her life, the more immediately warm of the two qualities I might describe as her primary ones. The first is warmth, genuine, not performed, the kind that makes people feel seen without requiring them to perform a particular version of themselves to receive it. The second is a tendency, which I recognize with the particular recognition of someone who knows its origins, toward avoiding confrontation by managing her environment so carefully that confrontation rarely becomes necessary. She has always preferred to smooth rather than to address, to find a path around difficulty rather than through it. I have never regarded this as a flaw exactly. It is a quality that has certain uses. But I have also understood, in the way a mother understands the specific shapes of her own child, that the smoothing reflex has sometimes prevented Fernanda from having conversations that would have been better to have. I did not yet know how much Fernanda knew about what had happened with my car. That was a question I was not yet ready to ask, because asking it required me to first understand the full shape of what had happened. You do not ask the right questions before you know enough to ask them correctly. The man came back on the line. He confirmed the service record. He confirmed the total. And then he said something that I had not expected, something that added a dimension to the document that I had not previously had access to. He said that the work had been authorized and that the vehicle had been brought in following a road incident that had been reported by the driver at the time of service. I said, "A road incident." He said, "Yes, ma'am. The driver reported that the vehicle encountered a road hazard that resulted in the suspension damage. Standard basis for this type of repair." I said, "And the driver, can you tell me anything about the authorization? Was the work authorized in my name?" He paused. Then he said, "The service was authorized at the time of intake by the person who brought the vehicle in. Your name appears as the registered owner in our system." I said, "I see. And the outstanding balance. When does that need to be settled?" He gave me a date. 14 days from our conversation. I thanked him and ended the call. I sat with what I had learned for a moment. A road incident. Not a mechanical failure, not the pre-existing issue Ottavio had described in my driveway. A road incident. Something that happened because of how the car was being driven or where it was being taken. Something specific enough that the driver reported it at the time of service, which told me two things. First, that Ottavio knew what had caused the damage, and second, that he had known it long enough and clearly enough to describe it to the shop at intake. What he had not done was tell me. He had used my car. He had damaged it in a road incident he knew about and had reported to a mechanic. He had authorized repairs in a shop I had never used, with a total he had not discussed with me, resulting in a debt in my name. And he had returned the car to me with a document tucked into the passenger seat, carelessly, as I said, and had stood in my driveway telling me that these things happen. I thought about the word authorization, which the man on the phone had used. The driver had authorized the work at the time of intake. But the vehicle was mine. My name was in their system as the registered owner. The driver had authorized work on someone else's vehicle, in someone else's name, without telling that person. I wrote this sequence in my notebook. Plainly, in the way I write everything in that notebook, without drama, without emotional language, in the clear declarative sentences of someone recording what is true. Then I made a second call. Celso, the mechanic on the south side who has been servicing my car since I bought it. The man who had told me 6 weeks ago that everything was in order. I called his shop and he answered. Celso always answers his own phone, which is one of the things I value about him. And I asked whether I might come in the following morning for a conversation about my vehicle. He said of course. He asked whether something was wrong. I said I had some questions about a service record I had received from another shop, and I wanted his professional assessment of what it described. He said, "Bring it with me. I'll look at it properly." I said I would be there at 9. After I hung up, I went to the kitchen and prepared a simple supper. Not because I was particularly hungry, but because the structure of an evening meal is one of the routines I maintain regardless of what else is happening. Because routine is, as I said at the beginning of this account, one of the things that holds ordinary life in its correct shape during the periods when other things are attempting to displace that shape. I ate at the kitchen table. Outside, Rua das Acacias was doing what it does in the early evening, the particular quiet of a residential street that has completed its working day traffic and settled into the calmer rhythms of the hours between supper and sleep. A neighbor's door closing. A light going on in a window across the street. The entirely ordinary texture of a Wednesday evening that was, from the outside, indistinguishable from any other Wednesday evening. I thought about calling Fernanda. I decided not to. Not yet. Not until I had the full picture. This was not a decision made from coldness. I want to be clear about that, because what I was doing was not building a case against anyone, not assembling evidence for a confrontation, not moving toward some predetermined outcome with the strategic calculation of someone who has already decided what the resolution will look like. What I was doing was exactly what I would have done in my working years when a client told me something about an order that did not match my records. I was checking, I was verifying, I was refusing to accept a version of events that I had no independent reason to believe simply because the person presenting it expected me to. The following morning I drove, in my own car, with the service record in my bag and the notebook on the passenger seat where the document had been found the previous afternoon, to Celso's shop on the south side. Celso is 61 years old, a compact and steady man who moves through his work with the quiet efficiency of someone who finds genuine satisfaction in doing things correctly. He has known my car for 4 years. He knows its maintenance history because I have given it to him in writing at every service visit, which is something he once told me he appreciated because it allowed him to see the vehicle's history as a whole rather than in isolated appointments. He received me that morning with the same unhurried attention he brings to everything, and we sat in the small office at the front of his workshop, and I placed the service record on the table between us. He read it. He took his time with it, which I expected and appreciated. He did not immediately deliver an opinion. He read each section. He looked at the work described. He looked at the date. He looked at the amount. Then he said, "This is suspension and undercarriage repair." I said, "Yes?" He said, "When was your last service with me?" I told him the date. 6 weeks prior. I had the notebook and I opened it to the relevant entry and set it beside the service record. He looked at both. He said, "Marina, I checked your suspension at that service. It was in good condition. Normal wear for the vehicle's age, nothing that required attention, nothing that suggested imminent failure." I said, "That is what I understood as well." He said, "Suspension components don't deteriorate to the point of requiring this level of repair in 6 weeks of normal use." I said, "What would cause this kind of damage?" He was quiet for a moment. He has the quality of a professional who does not speculate carelessly, who understands that a measured answer is more useful than an immediate one. He said, "An impact, something significant. Off-road use on terrain the vehicle isn't designed for, or an impact with an obstacle at speed. This is not wear and tear damage. This is incident damage." I nodded. He looked at me. He has known me for 4 years, and he understands, I think, what kind of woman he is dealing with. The kind who asks precise questions and listens to precise answers and does not require the information to be managed for her. He said, "Was the car recently lent to someone?" I said, "Yes." He said, "And you weren't told about an incident?" I said, "I was told it was a pre-existing mechanical issue." Celso looked at the service record again. Then he looked at me. He said, "This is not a pre-existing mechanical issue. Whatever happened to this suspension happened in a specific event, and the work done here," he indicated the document, "is correctly described and reasonably priced for what it addresses. But it is repair of incident damage, not routine maintenance." I said, "And the outstanding balance. If this debt is in my name, am I legally responsible for it?" He said, "I'm a mechanic, not a lawyer. But I can tell you that whoever authorized this service at intake authorized it in connection with your vehicle. How that authorization was given and who is actually responsible for the resulting debt, that's worth getting proper advice about." I thanked him. I asked whether he could provide me with a written summary of his assessment of my vehicle's condition at the 6-week prior service, specifically noting the suspension inspection and its results. He said he would prepare it that afternoon. I left his shop with considerably more than I had arrived with. Now, I want to pause here for a moment. Because if you have been with this account from the beginning, you already understand that what I was assembling in those 2 days was not simply the truth about a damaged car. It was the truth about something larger. About what it means when someone takes the thing you have built carefully and treats it as though your careful building entitles them to use it carelessly. And about what happens inside a woman who has spent 76 years being the kind of person who can be relied upon when she finally decides that being reliable does not mean being infinitely absorbable. If this story is reaching you, if Marina's experience is sitting with you in any way, subscribe to this channel if you have not done so already. These are the stories that deserve to be told completely, and your presence here is what makes that possible. Stay with me. The most important conversation in this account is still ahead. I arrived home from Celso's shop at 10:30, and I sat at the kitchen table with the service record and my notebook and Celso's verbal assessment. His written one would come later that afternoon, and I did the thing that I think was the most useful thing I did throughout this entire experience. I wrote down what I knew, not what I felt, not what I suspected, what I knew. The discipline of that distinction between what is established and what is inferred, between what the documents confirm and what the emotions supply, is one I developed through decades of work that required precision, and it has served me in many situations that were less about fabric and more about people. What I knew, my car had sustained suspension damage during the period it was in Ottavio's possession. The damage was consistent with an impact event, not mechanical deterioration. The work had been authorized at a shop I had never used, in my name, without my knowledge. The outstanding balance was in my name, with a settlement deadline 14 days from my phone call. Ottavio had described the damage to me as a pre-existing mechanical issue. Ottavio had suggested, in my driveway, that I should consider the balance my responsibility. Ottavio had known about the incident at the time it occurred. He had reported it at intake. What I did not yet know was why he had used my car for the purpose that had resulted in the damage. The vague project he had described when asking to borrow it had not been explained in any specific terms, and I had not asked for specifics because the request had seemed, at the time, ordinary enough not to require them. That gap, between the vague explanation offered and the actual use the car had been put to, was the remaining piece I did not have. I also did not know the extent of Fernanda's knowledge, whether she knew about the incident, whether she knew about the shop visit, whether she had known, when Ottavio returned the car to me the previous afternoon, what was in the document on the passenger seat. That question was the one I had been most carefully setting aside, because the answer to it would determine not only what had happened with the car, but something more fundamental about the family I was part of, and the way that family had been operating around me. That afternoon, while I was waiting for Celso's written assessment, I did something that I had not planned to do, but which felt, once I began, entirely necessary. I went through the documents related to the car, not just the service records, but everything: the registration, the insurance policy, the original purchase documentation. I spread it across the kitchen table, and I read it with the attention of someone who has decided that the full picture is more important than the comfortable picture, and that she is prepared to sit with whatever the full picture turns out to contain. The insurance policy was current. That was straightforward. But within the policy documentation, there was a section concerning authorized drivers, the people named on the policy as individuals permitted to operate the vehicle. I read that section carefully. Ottavio was not named. This was not, on its own, dramatic. Many people borrow vehicles from family members without being named on the insurance, and in many cases, this is a practical oversight rather than a significant issue. But it was another piece of the picture, and it changed the nature of the authorization that had been given at the repair shop in a way that I would need to understand fully before the conversation I now knew I was going to have. I called the insurance company. I explained the situation, not completely, not with all the detail I had assembled, but enough to ask the question I needed answered. If an unlisted driver causes damage to an insured vehicle during the period of borrowing, and that damage results in a repair debt incurred in the owner's name, what is the insurance position? The woman I spoke with was patient and professional. She explained the relevant terms. She told me that the specific circumstances I was describing would require a formal incident report to assess properly, but that in general terms, repairs resulting from an incident involving an unlisted driver create a situation that the insurer would need to review carefully before covering. She said, "It would be advisable in any case to report the incident promptly and let the review process determine coverage." I said, "No incident was reported to me by the driver at the time." A brief pause. She said, "I see. In that case, a delay report would also be possible, but the circumstances would be reviewed with that context in mind." I thanked her. I set the phone down. I sat at my kitchen table with the full spread of documents in front of me: the service record, the notebook, the insurance policy, the registration, and I looked at all of it together. Then I called Ottavio, not to confront him, not yet. I called him because there was one question that the documents could not answer and that I needed him to answer before I was ready to have the real conversation. He answered in his usual manner. Smooth. Easy. The voice of a man who has decided the situation has been placed where he intended it and requires nothing further from him except patience while it settles. I said, "Ottavio, I have one question, and I need a direct answer. What did you use my car for during the week you had it?" A pause, longer than the ones in my driveway. Then he said, "I told you, the project." I said, "I need the specific answer, not the general one." Another pause. He said, "I helped someone move some equipment to a site outside the city. The road was rougher than expected." I said, "A site outside the city." He said, "Yes." I said, "On a road that caused suspension damage." He said, "Like I said, it was rougher than—" I said, "Thank you. That is what I needed to know." I hung up. I sat with what he had said. A site outside the city, equipment, a rough road. The vague project he had described when asking for the car had been, in its actual form, the use of my vehicle as a transport workhorse. Driving it on terrain it was not designed for a purpose he had not disclosed when asking to borrow it, resulting in damage he had known about and reported to a shop authorized in my name and left on the passenger seat for me to find. And the person who might know more about this, who might have known all along, or who might have known nothing at all, was the woman who lived with him and who called me every Sunday at 11 o'clock because that had been our habit for years. Fernanda's call came the following Sunday, at exactly 11. I answered. Her voice was warm and ordinary, the voice of a woman calling her mother on a Sunday, unaware or aware or somewhere between those two things. I let her talk for a few minutes. Then I said, "Fernanda, I need to talk to you about the car." The quality of the silence that followed told me something. Not everything, but something. Something that would change the shape of the conversation I was about to have. Not because Fernanda had done what Ottavio had done, but because the silence told me that she was not entirely without knowledge of the situation, and that what I had taken as an Ottavio problem might also be, in ways I was still assembling, a family problem in the larger sense of that word. The silence on the other end of Fernanda's Sunday call lasted perhaps 4 seconds. In ordinary conversation, 4 seconds of silence is barely perceptible. A small pause between thoughts, the natural breath of someone gathering the next sentence. But there is a quality to certain silences that compresses time in the way that significant moments always do, that makes 4 seconds contain considerably more information than 4 seconds should reasonably hold. The silence I heard from my daughter that Sunday morning was not the silence of someone surprised by an unexpected topic. It was the silence of someone who had been waiting for a particular door to open and was now deciding, in the moment of its opening, how to walk through it. I said, "Fernanda, what do you know about what happened with my car?" She said, "Mom," I said, "please give me an honest answer, not the managed version, the honest one." There was another pause, shorter than the first, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed in the specific way that voices change when a person stops performing composure and simply speaks from wherever they actually are. She said, "I knew about the damage, not right away. He told me 2 days after it happened. I told him he needed to tell you immediately and sort it out properly, and he said he would handle it, and I—" She stopped. "I let him handle it." I said, "When he returned the car to me yesterday, did you know about the document on the passenger seat?" She said, "I didn't know about the document specifically. I knew there was an outstanding bill that he was planning to— He told me he was going to talk to you about it and work something out." Work something out. The phrase sat in my mind with the particular weight of euphemism, the kind of language that functions as a container for a reality that the speaker is not quite ready to name directly. I said, "Fernanda, working something out would have meant coming to me before the bill was incurred. It would have meant calling me the moment the incident happened and telling me what had occurred with my car. Working something out, at that point, would have been an honest conversation that I could have been part of. What happened instead was that a debt was created in my name, the car was returned to me with the document left on the seat, and I was standing in my driveway being told that these things happen." A long silence. She said, "I know." 2 words, delivered with the quality of someone who has been carrying the weight of knowing and has found, in being asked to say it plainly, a relief that the carrying had not provided. I said, "I need to have a proper conversation with you and Ottavio together. Not on the phone, in person. I'm going to ask you both to come here on Tuesday evening." She said, "Of course. Mom, I'm sorry. I should have—" I said, "Tuesday. We'll talk properly then." I ended the call. I sat at my kitchen table for a long while after that, in the quiet of a Sunday morning that was doing what Sunday mornings in Joinville do in that season. A soft, gray, bright quality to the light, the street outside in its weekend stillness. The kind of morning that asks nothing of you and offers, in that asking nothing, a particular kind of space for thought. I thought about Fernanda. I want to be careful here, because I think the way I thought about my daughter that morning is important to the story and easy to misrepresent. I did not think about her with anger, which might be the expected emotion and would not have been unjustified. I thought about her with the complicated tenderness of a mother who knows her child's specific shape of weakness, who has known it since the child was young enough for that weakness to have been visible in its earliest form, and who understands that the weakness is not character but pattern, not malice, but habit. Fernanda smooths. She manages the environment around difficulty rather than addressing difficulty directly. She had known about the damage and had told Ottavio to handle it, which, in Fernanda's internal logic, was not the same as allowing it to go unaddressed. She had registered the problem, had told the relevant person to correct it, and had then trusted that correction was happening rather than verifying that it was. This was not dishonesty in the deliberate sense. It was something softer and more common, and in certain ways harder to address. The avoidance of a person who genuinely does not enjoy conflict and has developed, over decades, a set of strategies for not having to be present for it. Ottavio was a different matter. I had been thinking about Ottavio since Thursday afternoon, and the thinking had moved through several stages in the way that honest thinking about a complicated situation tends to do when you allow it to go where the evidence points rather than where you would prefer it to go. The initial stage had been the clean, clarifying anger of someone who has been misled, sharp and specific and entirely justified. The subsequent stages had been more complicated. Understanding the full sequence of what he had done required me to think about not only the actions themselves, but the reasoning that had underwritten them, and the reasoning, when I examined it carefully, revealed something about how Ottavio had been thinking about me that was more illuminating than the actions alone. He had borrowed my car with a vague explanation because he had understood, correctly, based on years of evidence, that I would not press for specifics. He had used the car for a purpose he had not disclosed because he had calculated, again based on evidence, that I would not ask detailed questions about what the borrowing was actually for. When the damage occurred and the repair was necessary, he had authorized the work in my name at a shop I did not know because he had understood that my name on the account was less likely to generate immediate scrutiny than his own. And when the car was returned and the document was on the seat, his response, standing in my driveway, hands in pockets, telling me these things happen, was the response of a man who had assessed the situation and concluded that his best option was to present the outcome as inevitable and trust that I would absorb it. Because I had always absorbed things. Not this, not deliberately, not the large and obvious things. But over 14 years of being Ottavio's mother-in-law, I had absorbed the countless small things that accumulate around a person who is known for being capable and accommodating. The slightly longer borrowing periods on the rare previous occasion when I had lent something. The favors that arrived as assumptions rather than requests. The way Ottavio spoke about my situation, my car, my house, my resources, with the comfortable familiarity of someone who regards them as part of a family ecosystem to which he has an implicit claim. I had not corrected any of this. I had absorbed it because it was easier, because the individual instances seemed too small to address, because the relationship with Fernanda was worth more to me than any particular friction with Ottavio, because I am the kind of woman who does not make scenes over small things. All of which was true, and all of which had contributed, over 14 years, to creating the expectation that my absorption was reliable and my limits were theoretical. He had been wrong about that. But he had not been wrong without reason. That recognition, that I had participated, through years of quiet accommodation, in constructing the conditions that made his behavior possible, was the most uncomfortable part of my thinking that Sunday morning. And I sat with it honestly rather than deflecting it, because I have never found it useful to understand only the other person's role in a situation when my own role is part of the picture. I was not blaming myself for what Ottavio had done. His decisions were his. But I was honest enough to acknowledge that what I had been allowing to pass unaddressed had not been without consequence. Tuesday evening arrived with the particular quality of an occasion that all parties know is significant, and none have discussed in those terms. Fernanda and Ottavio arrived together at 7, which was what I had asked, and they came in with the quality of two people who have had an intervening conversation and have arranged themselves, to varying degrees, for what is ahead. Fernanda had the look of someone who has not slept particularly well for several nights. Ottavio had the look of someone who has decided that the best presentation in a difficult situation is calm confidence, and who is deploying that presentation with slightly more visible effort than it would have required if the situation were not as difficult as it is. I had set the kitchen table with 3 cups of coffee because the kitchen table is where honest conversations happen in my house, and coffee is the appropriate accompaniment to an honest conversation at 7 in the evening. I had also placed in the center of the table 3 things: the service record from the North Side shop, Celso's written assessment of the vehicle's condition at the 6-week prior service, and a single sheet of paper on which I had written, in my own hand, in the plain, declarative sentences I use for things that need to be said without ambiguity, a summary of what the evidence established. Ottavio looked at the documents on the table. He looked at me. He began to say something. I could see it beginning, the managed opening of a prepared explanation, the version of events he had been refining since the driveway. And I said, quietly and without particular emphasis, "Let me say something first. Please." He stopped. I said, "I have spent the past several days looking at the documents connected to what happened with my car. I have spoken with my mechanic, with the shop that performed the repair, and with my insurance company. I have written down what I know." I indicated the sheet of paper. I am not going to ask you to account for each detail because the details are in front of us and they speak for themselves. I paused. Then I asked the question I had been carrying since Thursday afternoon. I said, "Ottavio, when you were standing in my driveway telling me these things happen, did you believe that was true? Or did you believe I would accept it because accepting things is what I do?" The kitchen was very quiet. He looked at the table. Fernanda looked at her coffee cup. He did not answer for a long moment, not the pause of someone formulating a response, but the longer silence of a person who has been asked a question precise enough that no prepared answer fits it, and who is therefore left with only the unprepared truth or nothing. He said, "I thought you would let it go." 3 words. Not an excuse, not a defense. A plain admission of the calculation that had underwritten everything from the driveway to the shop authorization to the borrowed car with its vague explanation. He thought I would let it go, because I always let things go. I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, "I know you did. And I want you to understand that the fact that you were right about my history of letting things go is part of what I am addressing today. Not just the debt and not just the damage, but the pattern. Because a pattern that has been allowed to continue for 14 years has to be addressed honestly, not just at its most recent expression." Fernanda said, "Mom, I should have called you the moment he told me. I should have made him call you. I didn't, and I'm sorry." I looked at my daughter. I have looked at her across kitchen tables for 44 years, in every configuration of circumstance that family life produces, and the expression she had that Tuesday evening was one I had not seen often. The uncovered, unmanaged expression of a woman who has run out of strategies for smoothing and is simply present with her own accountability. I said, "I know you are, and I believe you." I looked back at Ottavio. I said, "Here is what is going to happen. The outstanding balance at the repair shop is going to be settled by you, not by me. You will call them tomorrow morning and make the necessary arrangement. I will provide you with the contact information. If you need the written confirmation of payment to come to me directly, I will arrange that with the shop." He said, "Marina." I said, "I am not finished. The damage to my car was caused during a use you did not disclose when you asked to borrow it. That use was your choice, and the damage is its consequence. I am not going to carry the financial consequence of your choice." He said, "The amount is—" I said, "I know what the amount is. It is in the documents." He was quiet. I said, "I am also going to ask something of both of you, and I want you to hear it as what it is. Not as a punishment, and not as a dramatic declaration, but as a clear statement of what I need going forward. I looked at them both. I said, I am 76 years old. I have built this life carefully. This house, this car, these resources, none of them are large by any standard, but they are mine, and they exist because I made deliberate decisions over many decades to preserve them. When someone asks to use something that belongs to me, I need that request to be honest. Honest about the purpose, honest about the risk, honest about the consequences if something goes wrong. I am not refusing to help family. I have never refused to help family, and I do not intend to begin. But I am establishing that help has to be asked for honestly, because help that is assumed or managed or engineered around my willingness to absorb the aftermath is not help at all. It is something else. The kitchen held the sentence for a moment. Then Fernanda said, "You're right. Not qualified, not followed by an explanation or a softening or a but. Simply, you're right." Ottavio said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "I'll settle the bill." I said, "Thank you." We sat with the coffee for a little while longer. The conversation that followed was quieter and less structured. Not the managed, purposeful exchange of the first part of the evening, but the more ordinary conversation of people who have said the necessary things and are now finding their way back to being family in the smaller and more daily sense of that word. Fernanda talked about her work. Ottavio was quieter than usual, which I expected. I told them about Celso's assessment, which I thought was useful to share because it established clearly, and from a professional source, that the damage was not the pre-existing issue Ottavio had described to me in the driveway, and that having that established removed the version of events that had been offered as an alternative to the true one. Ottavio did not argue with Celso's assessment. This, I thought, was its own form of acknowledgement. Before they left, Fernanda hugged me at the door with the kind of embrace that carries more than the warmth of its physical form. The embrace of a daughter who understands that something has shifted and who is, I believe, relieved by the shift rather than threatened by it. Ottavio said goodnight with a quality of quietness that was not hostile, but was genuinely different from the casual confidence he had brought to my driveway 4 days earlier. I watched them walk to their car, and I stood at the door for a moment before going back inside. The documents were still on the kitchen table. I gathered them and put them back in their proper places. The service record in the folder in the third drawer, Celso's written assessment added to the file alongside it. Then I wiped the table and washed the coffee cups and turned off the kitchen light. I want to tell you about the days that followed, because the story does not end with the Tuesday evening conversation, and I think what came after matters as much as what led up to it. Ottavio called the shop on Wednesday morning, as he had said he would. I know this because the shop called me that afternoon to confirm that the outstanding balance had been settled and to ask whether I would like a receipt sent to my address. I said yes. The receipt arrived 2 days later. I filed it in the folder behind the service record. The habit of keeping things properly documented does not pause for emotional significance. Fernanda called on Thursday, not Sunday, not at 11, but Thursday morning at 9:30, which was unusual. And the unusualness of it told me that she was operating differently than she had been before Tuesday evening. That something in her own habit of management had shifted enough to produce a different kind of contact. She asked if I was free for lunch on Saturday. I said yes. We met at a restaurant in the Centro that we have been going to for years, a small place that has been in the same location for decades and that serves food my mother would have recognized. The kind of cooking that does not require explanation because it is simply the food of where you are. We sat at a table near the window and we ate and we talked in the way that mothers and daughters talk when they have decided to be honest with each other rather than managed, slowly, with space in the conversation for the things that take longer to form into words. Fernanda said, over coffee, "I've been thinking about what you said, about help being asked for honestly." I said, "And?" She said, "I think I've let Ottavio handle things the way he handles them for a long time because it felt easier than requiring him to handle them differently. And I think I convinced myself that as long as the outcome was roughly okay, the way it happened didn't matter as much. I said, "The outcome was not roughly okay this time." She said, "No, it wasn't. And I think if I'm honest, there have been other times when it was only roughly okay because someone else absorbed the part that wasn't." I said, "Yes." She looked at her coffee. She said, "I'm sorry I made you one of those someone else's." I reached across and put my hand over hers briefly, the gesture of a mother who has said what needed to be said and who now wants her daughter to understand that the saying of it was not a withdrawal of love, but an expression of it. That requiring honesty from someone you love is one of the ways you demonstrate that the love is genuine rather than merely comfortable. I said, "You didn't make me anything. I participated. We are both going to do differently." She almost smiled. The almost smile of my daughter, which is a different configuration from my own, but which comes from the same place. The place of a woman who feels things more deeply than she always shows, who holds more than she always says, who is learning. At 44, what I am still learning at 76, which is that the people who love you deserve the honest version of your limits as much as they deserve the generous version of your capacity. Now I want to pause here and tell you something directly, because I have been telling this story for 3 parts, and I believe in saying the important things plainly when the moment for them arrives. If you have been with Marina through all of this, through the driveway and the documents and Celso's quiet assessment and the Tuesday evening kitchen table, then you already know that what this story is actually about is not a car or a repair bill or a son-in-law who made a selfish decision. It is about a woman who spent 76 years being the kind of person you can rely on and who discovered that being reliably available is only a virtue when the people who rely on you have been honest enough to actually ask. If you recognize something in Marina's experience, if you have ever been the person in your family whose limits were treated as suggestions, whose resources were regarded as accessible without requiring genuine permission, I want you to leave a comment below and tell me. Tell me your version of the driveway moment. Tell me whether you have ever said enough in the quiet way that actually changes something rather than the loud way that only clears the air. And if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, please do that now, because these stories are made for people who understand that the ordinary moments of ordinary lives contain more courage than they are usually given credit for. Several weeks after the Tuesday evening, I did something that I want to tell you about because I think it is the right ending for this account. Not a dramatic ending, not a triumphant one, but the right one. I took my car to Celso's shop, not for a repair, for a full inspection, the kind I have done annually since I purchased the vehicle, the kind that tells you the complete current condition of something you care for and want to understand properly. Celso went through it with his usual thoroughness, and we sat afterward in the small office at the front of the workshop, and he told me what he had found. The suspension repair had been done adequately by the North Side shop. Not how I would have chosen to have it done, not with a mechanic who knew the car's history, but adequately. The work was sound. The vehicle was in good condition. There were no secondary issues resulting from the incident. He said, "She's solid, Marina. You've taken good care of her." I said, "I intend to continue." He smiled. He has the smile of a man who finds genuine satisfaction in the right outcome, which is the kind of smile that belongs to someone who does their work for the right reasons. I drove home along the route I always take, through the residential streets of this part of Joinville that I have driven for 4 years, with the quiet pleasure of a woman who moves through a city she knows and finds the knowing of it a form of comfort. I parked in front of the house on Rua das Acacias. I turned off the engine. I sat for a moment in the particular silence of a stopped car. I looked at the keychain in my hand, the metal charm from Florianopolis. The key I had recut when I changed the locks, and which I will have recut again if the locks ever need changing again. The small object that holds more history than its size suggests, the way most small objects do when they have been carried long enough. Then I got out of the car. I went inside. I went to the study and I opened the notebook to a new page. At the top, I wrote the date. Beneath it, I wrote, "Full inspection. All clear. Vehicle in good condition." Beneath that, I wrote something I had not written in the notebook before. Something that was not a service record or a mileage notation or a maintenance item, but which I felt belonged in the document alongside all the other true things it contained. I wrote, "My car, my name, my decision." Then I closed the notebook and put it in the drawer. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table in the house on Rua das Acacias, and I looked out at the street where the afternoon was settling into its familiar late pattern. The light changing, the shadows lengthening, the day completing itself in the unhurried way of days that have been lived through rather than managed around. I am 76 years old. I am a retired seamstress who knows how to read the grain of a fabric and the terms of a service record and the quality of a silence and the exact moment when a conversation needs to stop being accommodating and start being honest. I live alone in a house I maintain carefully, and I drive a blue sedan that I purchased with my own savings and which is, as Celso said, solid. I have spent a long life being the person people call when something needs to be managed. I will likely continue to be that person in some measure because it is genuinely part of who I am, and I do not wish to excise it simply because it was taken advantage of. But I have also learned, or perhaps remembered, since I think some truths are not new to us so much as return to us at the moments when we need them most, that being capable is not the same as being responsible for whatever anyone else decides to place within reach of your capability. I can help. I can choose to help. When the help is requested honestly and the request respects my right to say yes or no with full information. What I will not do, what I have decided in the quiet of a Tuesday evening kitchen and a Saturday lunch and a drive home along a familiar route. What I will not do is absorb. There is a difference. I have always known the difference. I have simply spent too long acting as though I did not. That ends here. In this kitchen, with this coffee, with the notebook in the drawer and the car parked on the street and the keychain on the table in front of me, the Florianopolis charm catching the late afternoon light the way it has for more years than the key it's attached to has existed. I am still Marina Valença. I am simply the version of her that has decided her name belongs on the documents she chooses to sign, not the ones chosen for her while she wasn't looking. If this story stayed with you, if you found yourself nodding at something Marina understood, or felt the particular recognition of having absorbed something you should have addressed, leave a comment below. Tell me which moment in this story felt most familiar to you. Tell me whether you have ever had to reclaim something that belonged to you all along. These conversations are the reason these stories get told, and every comment you leave is read with the same attention Marina gave to her documents, carefully, completely, and without skipping the parts that matter most. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already. Stay for the next story, and take care of the things that are yours.